"I shouldn't be doing this," I whispered, feeling Fred's lips trace along my neck, sending shivers down my spine. His hands gripped my waist, pulling me closer as if he never wanted to let go. We both knew this was wrong, that it crossed every line we shouldn't have dared to approach, but here we were, tangled together in a moment that felt both forbidden and exhilarating. My name is Monica, and I am 42 years old. I never imagined that I would find myself in a situation like this, entangled in a complicated, secret affair with my stepson, Fred. It all began so innocently. My husband, Mark, is a successful businessman, always on the go, glued to his phone or buried in work. Our relationship, once filled with passion and connection, had grown stale and distant. The nights felt especially lonely when Mark retreated to his study, leaving me alone in our oversized, silent house. I started longing for something more, something to remind me of what it felt like to be desired. Fred, my 24-year-old stepson, had just moved back home after graduating college. He was different now, no longer the boy I'd watched grow up, but a strikingly handsome young man. His presence brought a new energy into the house, and I found myself looking at him differently. At first, it was harmless glances, admiring the way he'd matured, but soon, those glances turned into something more, something I knew I shouldn't feel. It happened one evening when I was in our bedroom, getting ready for bed. I had just taken off my blouse, standing in front of the mirror, lost in thought. I hadn't heard Fred come home early. He pushed the door open slightly and caught sight of me before I could react. His eyes widened, and I felt a surge of embarrassment, mixed with a strange thrill. "Oh, I'm sorry, Monica. I didn't mean to," Fred stammered, turning to leave. "It's okay," I said quickly, trying to play it off, but the look in his eyes lingered, a mix of surprise and something else, something deeper. We both knew it, felt it. An unspoken tension had been building between us, and in that moment, it snapped. I reached out before he could leave. "Wait, Fred," I whispered. "You don't have to go." He paused, looking back at me, his eyes searching mine for permission, for any sign that I wanted this as much as he did. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," I breathed, stepping closer. I could feel the warmth of his body, the rapid thump of his heart mirroring my own. "I've been feeling so lonely," I admitted, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. He moved closer, hesitantly at first, then with more confidence as he placed his hands on my hips. "I've thought about you too, Monica," Fred confessed, his voice husky with desire. "More than I should." Before I could respond, his lips were on mine, gentle at first but quickly growing urgent. It felt like every pent-up emotion we'd both suppressed was being released all at once. The kiss deepened, and I felt a wave of heat surge through my body as I melted into him. "This is so wrong," I gasped, pulling back for a moment, my mind racing with the implications. "Maybe," Fred murmured, pressing his forehead against mine, "but it feels so right." His words ignited something in me, a boldness I hadn't felt in years. I pulled him back into another kiss, my hands tangling in his hair as we stumbled toward the bed. The room spun around us, but all I could focus on was the feel of his hands exploring my body, the sensation of being wanted again. We collapsed onto the bed, a tangle of limbs and hurried breaths. "Are we really doing this?" I whispered, searching his eyes for any hesitation. "Yes," he replied, his voice firm, filled with a certainty I hadn't expected. "I want this, Monica. I've wanted you for so long." Hearing those words broke down any remaining barriers I had. I straddled him, feeling the solid strength of his body beneath me. His hands gripped my waist, pulling me closer as if afraid I might slip away. "Then show me," I dared, leaning in to kiss him again, letting all my doubts dissolve into the passion of the moment. The next hour was a blur of heated kisses and whispered confessions. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years, each touch igniting a fire deep inside me. The thrill of what we were doing, the danger, the secrecy, made it all the more intoxicating. But reality came crashing back when we heard the front door open. My heart leapt into my throat as I realized Mark was home early. "Oh my God, it's Mark!" I whispered, scrambling to fix my robe, panic surging through me. "Quick, we need to hide," Fred said urgently, glancing around the room. He slipped into the closet just as Mark's footsteps approached the bedroom. I barely managed to compose myself before Mark walked in, a smile on his face. "Hey, honey, I didn't think you'd be in here," he said, coming over to kiss me on the cheek. "Just relaxing," I replied, forcing a smile, my heart still pounding from the adrenaline rush. I could feel Fred's presence in the closet, the tension thick in the air as I tried to act normal. Mark settled onto the bed, oblivious to the chaos that had just unfolded. "How was your day?" he asked casually, stretching out on the comforter. "It was fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "just quiet, like always." As Mark chatted about his day, I couldn't help but sneak a glance at the closet. I knew Fred was just on the other side of the door, probably holding his breath, waiting for this moment to pass. My mind was spinning with a mix of fear and excitement, the thrill of our secret affair making my pulse race. Eventually, Mark left the room, giving me a chance to open the closet door. Fred stepped out, his face flushed, eyes wide with excitement. "That was too close," he whispered, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. "I know," I replied, feeling a rush of relief mixed with the lingering desire from our encounter. "But I can't stop now. This is just the beginning." Fred nodded, his expression serious. "I feel the same way. I don't want this to end, Monica." I knew we were standing on the edge of a cliff, but I was ready to jump. "Then let's not hold back," I said boldly, pulling him into another kiss. The line between right and wrong had long since blurred, and I was ready to dive headfirst into whatever this was, no matter the consequences. Fred's lips were still warm on mine when I pulled back for a moment, breathless and trembling. The adrenaline coursing through me made my head spin, and I couldn't believe we had taken this step, crossed this line. The sound of Mark's car driving away down the street had left an eerie silence in the house. In the house, a silence now filled only with our heavy breathing. "Do you realize what we just did?" I whispered, looking into Fred's eyes. They were filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place, part excitement, part fear, and maybe even a hint of guilt. But there was no hesitation. Instead, he reached out and cupped my face gently, his thumb brushing over my cheek as if I were something fragile he didn't want to break. "I know," he said, his voice low and steady, "but I don't regret it, Monica. I can't." Hearing him say that, the last remnants of my resolve melted away. I pulled him close again, feeling the familiar thrill surge through my veins. It was like a drug I couldn't quit. I knew this was wrong, that we were playing with fire, but the intensity of our connection was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It was real, raw, and I couldn't deny how badly I wanted him. "We can't keep doing this," I said, even as my fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. "Then tell me to stop," Fred challenged, his breath hot against my ear. "Tell me to walk away right now, and I will." I opened my mouth to say the words, but they wouldn't come. Instead, I kissed him again, a deep, desperate kiss that left no room for doubt about what I wanted. He responded with equal passion, pushing me back against the wall, his hands exploring my body as if he needed to memorize every inch of me. It was reckless, but I couldn't stop. The danger, the forbidden nature of our affair, it made everything feel heightened, like we were the only two people in the world. We stumbled toward the bed, falling into the sheets together. Fred's hands were everywhere, and I couldn't get enough of him. The room was filled with the sounds of our heavy breathing, soft gasps, and the whisper of sheets as we moved together. I felt more alive than I had in years, as if every nerve in my body had been set alight. But then, in the midst of our frenzy, my phone buzzed loudly from the nightstand. We both froze, our eyes locking in a moment of pure panic. It was Mark. His name flashed on the screen, and the reality of what we were doing crashed over me like a tidal wave. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The weight of our betrayal hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. "You should answer it," Fred said, his voice tight, his eyes searching mine for a sign of what I would do next. I nodded, grabbing the phone with trembling hands. "Hey, Mark," I said, forcing my voice to sound normal, casual, like I hadn't just been wrapped up in his son's arms. "Hey, honey." Mark's voice came through the line, cheerful and oblivious. "I just wanted to let you know I'll be home later than expected. Something came up at work." "That's fine," I managed to say, my heart pounding in my chest. I glanced over at Fred, who was watching me intently, every muscle in his body tense. "Take your time," I added, feeling a wave of relief and guilt wash over me. "Okay, see you tonight." "Love you," Mark said before hanging up. I set the phone down slowly, turning back to Fred. "We need to stop," I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. The look in his eyes told me he knew it too. "We're not stopping," he said, a small defiant smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You don't want to stop any more than I do." He was right. I could feel it in the way my body responded to him, the way I couldn't seem to pull away, even though I knew I should. I took a deep, shaky breath, staring at him as if seeing him for the first time. This was more than just lust. It was something deeper, something dangerous, and I was falling headfirst into it. "Come here," I whispered, pulling him close once more. His lips found mine again, and I let myself get lost in the sensation, in the escape he offered from the mundanity of my life. It was like I had been living in black and white, and suddenly everything was in vivid color. We spent the next few hours wrapped up in each other, exploring this new territory we had stumbled into. It felt like time had stopped, like the outside world no longer existed. But eventually, reality intruded once more. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the room. I knew Mark would be home soon, and the thought filled me with a mixture of dread and longing. "I should go," Fred said, his voice filled with reluctance. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, his touch lingering. "I know," I replied softly, cupping his face in my hands. "But this isn't over, is it?" He shook his head, his expression serious. "No, Monica, this is far from over." He kissed me one last time before slipping out the door, leaving me alone in the room. I stared after him, my heart still racing, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. What had we done? What were we becoming? I knew I was playing a dangerous game, balancing on the edge of a knife. One wrong move, and everything would come crashing down, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. The thrill, the passion, the forbidden nature of our relationship, it had taken hold of me, and I was powerless to fight it. As I sat there in the dim light, I realized something. I didn't want to fight it. For the first time in years, I felt alive, and I wasn't ready to give that up, no matter the cost. The next few days were a blur of guilt and desire, a whirlwind of stolen glances and hidden smiles. Every time Mark left for work, I felt the tension rise in the house. Fred and I would exchange a look that said everything we shouldn't say out loud. It was intoxicating and terrifying at the same time. One evening, after Mark left for a late business dinner, I found myself pacing the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew Fred would be home soon. I didn't have to wait long before I heard the familiar sound of his footsteps on the stairs. He stepped into the room, his eyes locking onto mine immediately. There was no hesitation this time. We both knew why we were here, what we were about to do. "Monica," he said softly, stepping closer, "I can't keep pretending this isn't happening." "Neither can I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He closed the distance between us in 2 long strides, his hands gripping my waist as he pulled me close. Our lips met in a frantic kiss, all the pent-up emotions and unsaid words pouring out in that one moment. It was like a dam had broken and there was no holding back the flood. We stumbled together to the couch, falling onto it in a tangle of limbs. I could feel the heat of his body pressing against mine, his hands exploring my curves with a need that mirrored my own. It felt like everything was finally clicking into place, like we had been building up to this moment for months. "This feels too good," I gasped, arching my back as his lips trailed down my neck. "It shouldn't, but it does." "I don't care," Fred replied, his voice husky and full of emotion. "I want you, Monica. I've wanted you since the moment I moved back here." His words sent a shiver down my spine. I pulled him closer, burying my hands in his hair as I kissed him deeply. It felt like we were teetering on the edge of a cliff, ready to jump but knowing there was no going back once we did. And in that moment, I decided to jump. We lost ourselves in each other. Every touch and kiss a declaration of the feelings we'd kept hidden for so long. It was raw and passionate, and I didn't want it to end. But as the minutes stretched on, reality began to creep back in. I knew Mark would be home soon, and the thought made my heart race for a different reason. "We need to stop," I said, pushing Fred away gently. "Mark could be back any minute." Fred groaned, burying his face in the crook of my neck. "I know, but I don't want this to end." "Neither do I admitted. "But we can't keep doing this here. It's too risky." He nodded, pulling back to look at me with a serious expression. "Then let's leave. Just for a weekend. We'll get away from all of this, from Mark, from everything. Just you and me." His suggestion took me by surprise. It was the kind of bold, impulsive idea I'd expect from him, and part of me wanted to say yes immediately, to pack a bag and run away with him, even if just for a little while. But I knew it wasn't that simple. "Fred, we can't just leave," I said, shaking my head. "What would we tell Mark?" "We'll think of something," he insisted, his eyes pleading. "Monica, please, I need this. I need you." The sincerity in his voice broke down the last of my defenses. Against all logic, I found myself nodding. "Okay," I said softly. "One weekend. But after that, we need to figure out what we're doing. This can't go on forever." He smiled, relief washing over his face as he pulled me into another kiss. "I promise," he said. "We'll figure it out. We spent the next hour planning our escape, whispering excitedly like teenagers sneaking out past curfew. It felt exhilarating, the idea of getting away together, of leaving behind the complications and just being us, if only for a short time. But as the sun set and the time for Mark's return grew closer, the reality of what we were doing started to set in. I felt a knot of anxiety form in my stomach, but I pushed it down. I couldn't think about that now. I had made my choice. When Mark walked through the door that evening, I greeted him with a smile, hoping he couldn't see the guilt in my eyes. He kissed me on the cheek, oblivious to the turmoil raging inside me. Fred slipped out of the room, giving me one last look before he disappeared upstairs. Then next day we left early in the morning. I told Mark I was going on a weekend spa retreat with a friend, and he didn't question it. He never did. He trusted me completely, and the thought made me feel sick to my stomach. But I ignored the pang of guilt, focusing instead on the excitement bubbling up inside me. Fred and I drove to a secluded cabin by the lake, far from the prying eyes of anyone who might recognize us. It was perfect. For 2 whole days, we were free. We laughed, we talked, we made love, and for a little while, I let myself believe that this was our reality, that this was how things could be. But all too soon, the weekend ended. We drove back in silence, the weight of what we had done settling over us like a thick fog. I knew we couldn't keep this up. Sooner or later, it would all come crashing down, and deep down, I knew that when it did, it would destroy everything. As we pulled up to the house, I turned to Fred, taking his hand in mine. "This has to be the last time," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "We can't keep doing this." He looked at me, pain etched into his features. "I know," he said quietly, "but it doesn't change how I feel about you." Tears welled up in my eyes, and I leaned over to kiss him one last time. It was a kiss filled with all the things we couldn't say, all the feelings we had to leave behind. "I love you," he whispered as we pulled apart, his voice barely audible. "I love you too," I replied, feeling the words break something inside me. We both knew it was the end. I stepped out of the car, walking back into the house where Mark was waiting for me, leaving behind the one person who had made me feel alive again. And as I closed the door behind me, I realized I was stepping back into a life that no longer felt like mine, a life where the thrill of the forbidden was just a memory that would haunt me forever.